So, the artistic heritage of Maylands. That's my talk for tonight. And what do we talk about heritage? Well, we talk about valued objects and qualities. Heritage doesn't feature in the name of our organisation, it's history. But we're also now more and more looking at the heritage. The buildings, the cultural traditions that have been passed down from previous generations. The UNESCO, United Nations Scientific and Cultural Organisation, defines it as a legacy from the past and what we live with today. And that's really what I'm interested in today. What happened in the past, what is happening now that we live in that really makes Maylands what it is. And what do I mean by artistic? Well, there's having or revealing natural creative skills or relating to art and artists. So something that's artistic doesn't have to be something that hangs on a wall or in a gallery or in a frame or something like that. It can be decorative, creative, useful, things which people are doing. It can be something on the side of a building, and that's the sort of things that we're going to talk about. So I've kept it conveniently broad so I can talk about dance, street art, woodwork and many other things. And why is it important, and why did I think it would be good to have a talk about it tonight? Because I believe heritage gives us this sense of identity. More than just the history, the history of the suburb, it's about the heritage that's been created, that we are creating today, the heritage that we can live with. And by preserving the artistic heritage in our suburb, we can ensure that future generations get to enjoy that and live with the richness that we've had for so many years. And what I'd like to achieve today is to provide an overview of some of the creative, artistic people who've lived in Maylands, or who worked in Maylands, or who in some way their work is associated with our suburb. And really what I'd like to do is encourage you to find out more. Do some research, come along and talk to us at the old police station, see what we've got. And in any case, I hope you find the next 30 minutes entertaining as well as instructive. What am I going to cover? I'm going to talk about artists. I'm going to talk about craftsmen, craftswomen, people who've done things and made things. Writers, activists, people who helped save the brickwork lakes, people who've done created films. Music, dance. Architects, designers, people who've designed buildings and made them around here. Creatives, other people who've done creative work in Maylands. And finally, I'll be talking about some of the street art that we can see around there. I want to start off by looking at some of the work of some of the artists who've been associated with Maylands. In fact, those people who create the sorts of things you do see on gallery walls. But these are some of just three of the artists that have been associated. The first one I want to talk about is a gentleman called Edgar Stites. Someone who worked in Maylands and was quite famous in his time, but then became far less well known. He also suffered a number of difficulties along the way due to his nationality in the war. Edgar was born in Hamburg in the 1800s. He was eldest of 4 children, and he and his family came to Perth in 1893. He went to Perth Technical School. That's important because later I'll talk about somebody who was one of his teachers there. And then he decided to further his study by travelling to Europe. He travelled to Europe, but unfortunately his timing was really bad, and it coincided with the outbreak of World War I. The Germans thought, he must be a foreign spy, so he was interned. Sadly, he was interned for the duration of the war. He was interned in Berlin. And then after the war, he returned to Maylands, but unfortunately he was then seen as a German sympathiser because he'd spent the war in Berlin, so he lost out on the other way as well. Anyway, he settled down in Maylands again. Unfortunately, World War II came along, and he and his family were then again suspected of being German sympathisers. His home in Maylands was vandalised by patriotic Maylanders, and he had a tough time in that time. But along that, he did actually do quite a lot of work. He worked for a long period of time in the early 20th century. He painted in a number of different ways: paints, oil, watercolours, oils, sculpture and drawing. And in his time, he was well known, and he enjoyed great success and repute. and at his time, he was recognised as one of the leading artists in WA. He lived in Caledonian Road until his death. He wasn't always sure of success. He also had to work in the family business. He used to catch the train to Freo, where he used to work with his brother as a window cleaner. He's prolific, very, very prolific. But unfortunately for him, this great output of work, sculpture, painting, didn't translate into financial success. And he became a recluse. He ended up surrounded by 3,000 artworks, and he's largely forgotten now. He died in 1966 and now is barely known. But his work still sells, it's still available if you go on the line. And here's a few examples. This portrait of an Aboriginal man, we actually have that. And that's actually normally hangs in the old police station. So at the end of this today, you're very welcome to go. I'll be mentioning all of these displays, and you're welcome to go along. That's a portrait of his.
Do you know when he painted that one?
That date, no, I don't, I'm afraid. I can find out later. I did actually have some of these written down, no, I don't, sorry. An oil painting of Guildford. We have a print of that. So sorry, I don't have the age, but I do have the prices. I actually looked at some of these on some art sales websites, and this would go in a region of 450 to 750. A portrait of Joseph Furphy, created in the early 20th century, has a guide price of $500 to $1,000. So there are still dealers who are interested in buying his work, but he's little known. If it wasn't for the work that John McLennan, our researcher, had done on digging out about Edgar Stites, I'm sure we wouldn't have heard. Another piece, portrait of an elder, again an Aboriginal one. And he created some original sculptures from which plaster casts could be made. And over there, rather hidden over there, but there is a cast of this particular sculpture. It's plaster painted over. And an art, again, if you have one of the original sculptures, the indicative price will be $600 to $1,200. So people are still interested in buying his work, but he's really not as well known as he might have been. One of our local artists was prolific for many years, but now sadly forgotten. Another gentleman with a European background, Len Zooks. He was born in Dwellingup, one of 7 children. His father was of Latvian descent and his mother was from the Ukraine. He did painting and sculpting, and in the 1970s he worked out of a room in this very building. If anyone remembers when this was a community resource and they had a number of different rooms, when different artists and different people used to work here in the various rooms which are now the dome offices up there. But for some years he worked here, so we feel he's one of ours. Len was another prolific artist. He's worked in many different forms. He's had his work exhibited at many prestigious venues around the world, including the Louvre, the Venice Biennale, the art exhibition associated with the 2012 London Olympics. Although he did paint in oils, his preferred medium was sculpture, which is now what he specialises in. He currently lives and works from his studio in Byford, and visitors who go to Byford can follow a sculpture trail around the town. There's a guided walk, or self-guided walk, and there are 9 of his sculptures around Byford. So you can see some of them, and some of them are very large. Wonderful thing called The Horses Came First, a statue that he created, commemorating wandering. He's won numerous art awards, and in 2009 he won a prize at the Sculpture by the Sea at Cottesloe for Antipodean recruits. There's another piece he displayed at Cottesloe. So he's still very active, but if you want to see his things, you go down to Byford. Been to Byford recently, actually, before I'd realised that his sculptures are around there. It's a nice little place. The third artist I want to talk about is still very much more current, Matthew McVeigh, Matt. He's a locally based artist who's very much alive and active. His family have strong connections to the area. In fact, his parents are members of MHPA. Many of you remember at the time when Matt was the artist in residence down at Chase Farm, you know, down by the boat yard, the old cottage there. For many years he was the artist in residence there before there was a renegotiation, and now the stand-up paddleboard people are there, or they were the last time I went through. He studied at Whopper, worked for many years at Chase Farm, as I said, but his studio is now in Sussex Street. He's has a very varied output. A lot of his work was on production design. If anybody ever went to see Cloud Street when it was at His Majesty's Theatre a few years ago, he was responsible for designing and creating all of the staging for that. He's done some visual art, which I'll show you, a number of public art installations, and he works with a number of communities. So public art can be seen around Perth. In Wellington Street, he's got some artwork down there. In Northbridge, the City of Vincent, and many other places. In community art, he works with community organisations, many of them up north, in the Pilbara and around there. He's done some work with community arts as well. This is a wonderful Old Man of the Storm, an engraving he did, very much capturing the colours of the north of WA. And what I also like, because I find them clever and amusing, he's done some work, sculptures, clever use of miniature shopping trolleys. He's created them into a helix there. And this was actually displayed at Cottesloe, called the New Covenant. He's made it with shopping trolleys. There's a number of artwork pieces on his website that he's used. He had a period when he went through doing work with shopping trolleys, but I found that quite amusing. So this was shown at Cottesloe in the indoor display hall, and of course this was on the beach because it's full size. And he currently, well, he did, I'm not sure whether they're still on display, maybe I'll need to ask Angela one day, though he has a couple of pieces that were available at the WA Art Gallery. So very, very varied, very wide range of pieces that he would display. And as I said, he's still very much linked to Maylands, and we're proud to have him associated with us. They are not on display at the moment. Yeah, so many of the good things are not on there at the moment. John, it's Peter Rohan, is it? Peter Rohan. We do actually have one of his paintings over there, which I don't talk about tonight because I just wanted to touch on three. So again, you're welcome to go and have a look afterwards. That's one of the other displays that we have up in the old police station. What I'd like to turn to is people who've designed buildings, or they've come up with architectural innovations, or they've actually been responsible for building significant structures around Maylands. I'd like to talk to about three people who've got strong connections to our suburb. The first is the very well-known Gustav Lieber. He was born in Germany, in Prussia, well, what was then Prussia, in 1862. He left school at 15 to become a builder's apprentice. After qualifying, he became a building contractor and worked with a guy called Joseph Klein. He worked around Europe, and they were responsible for building some major public buildings in Vienna, in Budapest, and in Sofia, and they were building with those. He then moved with his family to Australia, firstly to Adelaide, where he was quite successful in his building work, caught the eye of some Melbourne business people, and he and his partner went to Melbourne. Later he decided, like many people, his future was out west, and he moved over to Perth. They dissolved the partnership and he set out on his own, and he established himself as a builder in our city around 1900. Many of the things he built were on a grand scale, public buildings in Central Europe, and one of the major pieces of work that he was responsible for, the fire station in Murray Street, which you can still see today. One of the major ones is His Majesty's Theatre. This was when it was newly completed. And there he's actually standing there in the middle of all the people. So there's a picture of him as a builder in charge of creating that. And I don't seem to have seen it for a while, but they've restored the balustrades, haven't they now? Which has brought it back to some of its original grandeur, which I think is really good. Although the rest of the street doesn't look too busy at the moment. But yeah, so he was designed that, or rather built that, was responsible for building it. He did enjoy working on the grand scale, but one of his other interests was in hospitality, hotels, accommodation and such as that. So one of the things he wanted to do was build something in a particular style, something that people would remember. And of course he then designed this building. This is acknowledged as a substantial and significant design of its time. As you come in, you can see, and we'll show you these, if we pull these blinds up, you can see some of the woodwork. But the architraves around the doors, the tulips which are carved into it, the pressed ceilings, the tulip motif in the glass, the enormous square dome that you can see on the top. And the history of this building is a story in its own right, of course. And you can see the story of the Peninsula Hotel and some of our other historic photographs down at the old police station. Just before World War I, he gave up on building. There's some discussion as to whether, with his background, he was going to be unpopular during the war. But anyway, I think he'd had enough of building things, well, state-type buildings. So he moved up to Woobin, where he promptly started building again. But he became a very successful farmer, firstly in wheat, and he was a record producer of wheat. Then the market collapsed, but then he turned into sheep, and he eventually had many thousands of sheep. He lived until 1950, died in Perth in 1950, but Lieber's legacy lives on in our suburb as one of the iconic iconic buildings that we have. And I'm so grateful for the size and the grandeur of what he built. And one of our aims might be one day when the state has some money to share, it would be lovely to restore this wonderful floor to when people used to come to dances here and things. It makes them very sad to see how it's decayed. Albert Clare was a distinguished architect. He was born in Milligan Street. He lived in Perth. At a very young age, he joined the Public Works Department. He served in the war, was wounded and suffered internment, repatriated in 1919, married and lived on 5th Avenue in Maylands, so another Maylands person. And for many years, for 30 years, he was a chief architect of the Public Works Department at a time when Perth was developing, when they had a grand vision for some of the state public buildings, and he lived to the ripe old age of 82. The majority of his work in life, as I said, was in public works, and his association with Maylands is because of one very significant building that I'll show you. He designed some very striking buildings around Perth and WA. Anyone recognise that one? Yeah, Perth Girls' School. Hopefully they're going to keep that when they've built the 20 stories on the back of it. At least they'll keep this facade. We did go to a concert in there, and I think during the festival a few years ago they had like a ghost house or something there. They're using the building. They could use the building so well. So in 1934 he designed Perth Girls' School. Kay's House in Yallingup, one of the great hotels down south. That was 1938. The first buildings of Royal Perth Hospital in 1939, and a less attractive building, the Lotteries Commission House, in 1957. But why we particularly like him, of course, is his contribution to the Maylands streetscape. He was a person who designed the Victorian School for the Blind in 1937. This is the original when it was opened, and this is after its more recent transformation with WA Ballet. This walk appears on our Heritage Buildings walk. It also appears on our self-guided walk, where you can read more about the history of this building. And when I talk a little about WA Ballet, I have some aerial shots of how it used to be. Albert Clare designed many other striking buildings in our state, and his story can be found on many architectural history websites, and I'm sure many of you, when you go on the website, you'll recognise buildings in Leederville and other parts of Perth that he designed. The third and final architect I'd like to talk about is Patrick Miller. Coming up to date, He was born in Victoria, but moved to Perth in 1999. He's one of Perth's leading contemporary architects. He did have an office in Maylands, but he decided he was then going to have a more mobile structure. And he's got a strong reputation for designing cafes and bars. He's also been involved with us. He's come and talked to us, and he's a great supporter of heritage in the suburb. This is a picture of him enjoying his office. So this is fully kitted out. He's got all the Wi-Fi connections. He's even got a meeting area. He can work from home. He's also got that, and he's completely self-contained. Very much suits his lifestyle. And one of his recent major designs, if you've been down to the quayside in Freo, you recognise Gage Roads. It's by the Beeshed markets, so it's right on the water. Wonderful place to go, right on the harbour, and he was responsible for designing that. Oh, sorry, he's had lots of other local ones, not actually in Perth, which is unfortunate, but Inglewood, it's not too far. Quarter Acre Tavern, if you've ever been past that in Applecross. A burger bar, and the Riverview Hotel. So he's been, there's more information about Patrick on our website, and there's even a talk about him given by Sue Cundale, which is on our YouTube channel. Patrick still lives in Maylands with his family, so very much part of our artistic heritage. Turning from buildings, I'd like to talk about music and dance, both the past and the present. Throughout life, I mean, it's part of everybody's artistic heritage is the music, the songs, the dance, the music of our culture. And for us, numerous music teachers have worked and lived in Maylands. There weren't so many in the early days, but obviously as the population increased, the numbers went up. Probably reached a peak, but then with the influence of radio, when there were other forms of entertainment, the demand for teachers went down. But the newspapers of the time had numerous adverts for musical soirees, entertainments, in people's houses, in the hall, in Maylands Hall, and so on. And the sort of research that John McClellan's done just come up with just a list of how busy we were in those days. All these different teachers who were working out of houses and off premises in Maylands. So that's just some of the people. And within our archives, we've got quite a lot of information about some of these people. Sorry? They were. There was a ladies' thing, maybe? I don't know. We do actually have some people here who are associated with one. Please put your hand up when I get to the bit that you recognise. One of the more one of the individuals I wanted to mention was a lady called Chrissy Parrott. She joined WA Ballet very young in the 1970s. Her first choreographic work was Like Hiroshima, Just Another Fallout, which was put on in 1976. And her first commissioned work for WA Ballet was in 1978. She went away and spent time in Europe and developed her interest in contemporary dance and returned here in 1986. She formed the Chrissy Parrott Dance Company, Dance Collective, then she changed it to a Dance Company, and she won numerous commissions. More recently, her connection with us is that her company was based for many years at Sussex Street, so certainly part of our artistic heritage. As she developed, she managed to change with the times. She continues, well, I don't think she does as much now, but she continued to develop her techniques. And in fact, she was one of the early adopters of computer techniques such as motion capture. If anyone's ever seen like Lord of the Rings and where they do the motion capture, she was using that technology to choreograph dance. And so she used that and generated a number of works using this technology as source material. When I was reading up about her, I was astonished to find how many awards she got. She was Citizen of the Year in 2000. She was declared a State Living Treasure. She got the Order of Australia in 2021. She's still active, but she created what she says was her last work for the main stage in 2023. So her outstanding creativity and sheer volume A variety of her work has been recognised in many ways throughout the years. And here's a couple of the posters that we have in the Festival of Perth, and another one of her productions. So very much one of the leading lights in artistic heritage. Coral Thompson was born in Kalgoorlie, and she's one of those talented young ladies who was on the stage from the age of 3. She moved to Maylands after getting married and lived with her family on Railway Parade. She started her own dance school, age 16, and went on to run classes at the Lyric Theatre and the Presbyterian Church, and they ran annual displays. There are some pictures of Carol Thompson's School of Dancing, and there's some more down there. Would either of you ladies like to comment on? No. Do you want to comment on any of this? You were one of the students?
I was just going to say that tall lady, tall girl up
in the middle there?
That's my sister.
Your sister, wonderful.
She learned dancing on Coral.
Yeah?
For about 5-6 years before she went out and got her own dance school down here in Maylands as well.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
We'll make sure, John, make sure we capture these names. Yeah, all good. When I could go on to talk about our new project about the digital map, it's about where these people were living and working. It's going to be so important. But yeah, so she was, she ran a very successful dance school. We've got some more pictures of her things. And it's still good that people can come into the old police station, see these pictures on the wall and say, I know somebody who was in that picture.
Did you use that photograph for the girls on advertisement?
Yes, it was.
So I remember seeing it.
Yeah, there was indeed. Well done. It was on the flyer. Yes, that was a picture. It is. It's lovely, isn't it? Now, if I'd known, I would have included something like that when we always have the advertisement or the item in the Can You Help column in the paper. And she's usually very good. She publishes our notice, but I think they like picture. I should have put that picture in, exactly the sort of picture they like in the West Australian, because do you know any of these people? That's good. So that was Coral. She was very active, and please talk to our lady friends about what it was like there. And something I've only heard about very recently, when somebody came in to talk to us, was about Dawnette Doo and her Wonder Dogs. Did anybody ever see the performing dogs? No? This is Sue. Yes? No? No. Amazingly strange story that we were recently introduced by somebody who came into the old police station, came in with some materials. She lived in Maylands for many years before her death in 1993. She initially lived in the old Maylands, by the old Maylands Primary School, in the shop that used to be on the corner of Central and 7th Avenue, and later moved off Kirkham Hill Terrace. Now, this is all about performing dogs. Now, I'm not sure that the rules and regulations nowadays would allow this to happen, but apparently she was really amazing. She ran away to the circus at the age of 13, and from a very early age, if you read her story, she as a very young child, she'd get mice and rabbits and things and start training them. And she eventually got to be able to train these dogs. They could add, subtract, multiply, even answer the phone. And people said, well, you're obviously giving them signals. And so she said, okay. So she went out of the room, closed the door, and the dog could still do the trick. So quite astonishing. And in her heyday, she'd travel around Australia in this little car with the dogs. And she went all around Australia performing, associated with the circuses. So that was a little known aspect of Maylands' life, which I've only just heard about recently. Dawnette and her performing dogs. So that's just a few examples of people in the past that have been associated with music and dance. But that heritage, that artistic heritage, the music, the dance, is still very much alive in Maylands, as you know. Of course, it's also an honour that we are the home of WA Ballet. They took over a heritage building, which you've already seen in the early 2000s. Their home is here, but they have a national profile. They perform all over the country, upstate and internationally as well. And the unique design of the blind school building has become a perfect base for this troupe. As part of our Heritage Buildings walk, we went in there and we saw their rehearsal spaces, and they showed us just how important this wonderful big open spaces are for their work. This is as it was when it was built. There's the picture I showed you in 1937. Of course, that's all that exists now. But at the time, this goes all the way from Whatley all the way through, and it's not even on there, to Guildford Road. So it was, oh, there's Guildford Road there. So a massive area now, which is now, of course, all housing. Dormitories, factories, the hospital, the school for the children. So a very, very active in its time. The complex was very large. By the time it was closed down, the only building that was really left was the admin building at the front, and that's what WA Ballet took over the lease, and they've done a conversion. Had anyone been in that building? Yeah. So you know once you go in, it's very, very dramatic and very atmospheric. And the main rehearsal space, sprung floors, rehearsal space, is very good. Anyone interested in see how WA Ballet uses this incredible space, you can visit the foyer. You're welcome to go in the foyer, and there's a display of archive photographs and various other things. But there's also the open Fridays. Once a month there's a Friday opening. You can go along and you can visit and watch the dancers go through. We've been there. Amazing. It's a real class, and they go through it, and you see how hard these people work. It's $17, and there's next ones on the 24th of May, or the 7th of June, or the 26th of July. So go on the website, you can book a ticket, you go and sit on those seats at the end, and you watch the class go through it. So it's a great opportunity to see the ballet corps working. So WA Ballet, they don't perform here, of course, because they don't have the facilities, but this is their headquarters, and you often see their dancers round and about. Another major asset to the suburb is Wajo, the Youth Jazz Orchestra. It was set up in 1983, and their mandate is to work with young musicians 14 to 25. They moved into Maylands Hall in 2015. This is a much older photograph of Maylands Hall. Doesn't look quite like that now. And they've adapted that for some of their use. There's a rehearsal room at the bottom. But now part of that building is also a theatre troupe that use it for storing props and materials, and they don't perform there anymore. They do, Wajo don't perform there, but they do have a rehearsal space down there. They run 3 big bands, plus they encourage soloists. This was taken, one of the events down on the rise, just behind the old police station in front of the library. When they have that shipping container, they can open it up and create a temporary stage. I'm a great supporter, well, we're great supporters of Wajo. It's great to go along and see them, seeing young artists young musicians coming through. They have an annual concert at the Quarry Amphitheatre, if you've ever been over to the Quarry, over near, what's it called? Bold Park, thank you. City of Cambridge, Bold Park, great setting, and they have their 3 big bands and their soloists come on, and it's a great show to go to. They're also regular performers at Ellington. They're on there twice this month and next month. They're always performing, well worth going to see. And they do occasionally have open days at Maylands Hall. But as I said, it's not something that they perform, but at least you can go and see their facilities. So contemporary music of many different types is being created in Wajo. We also have a great venue in Lyric Lane Underground. So not only have the underground, but also live in the lane. You can go outdoors or underground. I know that Angela's recently, she was telling me about something she'd been to in Lyric Underground. It's a great venue for music. Now, I haven't been to an event in the lane when it's been, have you been to an evening? Yeah. It looks great, and I'm sure it's a great setting for the music and with the lights and everything. But we have that on our doorstep. It's a great facility, and it's wonderful that we have it. And there are also supporters and sponsors, so I think that's great. And of course, I'm not going into it now, but we're home to the Instrumental School of Music Services in the old Maylands Primary School. There's a great repository of musical instruments. It's the centre for music teachers around the state, and a place that nurtures young musicians as well. And they also have rehearsal spaces and a band. So turning from music The next area I wanted to talk about was craftsmen and craftswomen, people who make things, talented men and women who've lived and worked in Maylands and who've helped to create such a rich and varied artistic heritage. Flora Landels was a very prolific, and with her husband they set up the Landels Pottery. They worked for many, many years, and she was recognised throughout her life. She had many, many shows through it. She stopped pottery after her husband died. She only did painting, and eventually died in 1981. But her work, very many different sorts, and there's some pictures down here of some of her work down there. Again, you go on the website, these things are still on sale, some of her paintings, some of her early pottery, tremendous stuff. So one of the part of the richness that we have is these famous and talented potters were working in our suburb. Michael Lynn was a master woodworker. Again, got some pictures here of some of his works there. Working locally, he's recognised as an expert. He did teaching as well, and he was recognised by his peers as one of the expert woodworking. We have Claymake Studio in Ferguson Street. Again, this is a fascinating place. You can just wander in, as we did. Sue and I wandered in one day when I was preparing the talk, and they're very welcoming. People can go in there, anybody who wants to work there. You can come in and use their materials, or you might have your own plans, your own ideas. You can go in and use their facilities. Really nice people, and it's this big barn-like structure with lots of little spaces to work in. And they're encouraging young artists or new artists or even experienced artists to come. They offer learning opportunities for those who want to develop their skills, but also independent makers who already have skills can go along and work there. So it's well worth popping in to them in Ferguson Street and saying hello. They're very friendly. There's been 4 generations of silversmiths working in Maylands. Bethany is the 4th generation of her family. An early ancestor, her great-great-grandfather, J.W.R. Linton, was an instructor at the technical school at the time when Edgar Stites ascended. They went into silversmithing. They have a workshop in Caledonian Avenue. Apparently it's now shut down. They don't use that anymore. They still have the building. I did talk to her last year when I was preparing a talk. She now works in, she has a studio in Fitzgerald Street, and I think her home's up in Gidgee But her work, some of her work, got some examples over there of some of the silversmithing that she did. Some of her work, some of her decorative pieces are now on sale in Kings Park in that rather smart shop Aspects. So you can see some of Linton jewellery there. So again, not such a strong connection now, but for many years their silversmith facilities were in Caledonian Avenue. And briefly, there's many other creative people who have been associated with it. There's the media folk. Jenny Seaton, desperately like to have her come along and give a talk. She's still active on Curtin Radio. She was on TV for many years, before my time, I'm afraid. But she won the Logie for most popular performer on a couple of years. James Smillie, a Scottish-born actor who lived in Kirkham Hill Terrace for many years. He was in Return to Eden, Prisoner Cell Block H, Red Dwarf, and many other shows which we no longer watch. But I'm sure anyone who's watched TV in Perth would know his face and name.
He lives back in Scotland now.
He does, he's moved back to Scotland, hasn't he? Yeah. Still alive. Terry Spence started as a reporter, went on to become News and Current Affairs Director of Channel 9 in the 1990s. Terry was active with Frank Greenslade, one of our founder members, when they were fighting for to preserve the lakes from development round by the brickworks, and he was responsible for some of the TV work and the filming that went on. So Terry Spence was a great supporter. John Watts lived at the corner of Peninsula Road and Richard Street. He was a professional footballer, but then moved into sports broadcasting. Eventually he had his own Friday night segment on Channel 7, and later his own radio show, which ran for many years in Perth. And David Dallimore lived on a large block in Kathleen Avenue, and as well as after a career in aeronautical engineering in the UK and Australia, he found a niche in local broadcasting, and he had a radio show for many years. creatives, people who are working on the radio, people who are associated with Maylands. We've got a number of writers, of course, who've been associated. Frank Calhoun, keen student of aviation history, as well as being a great mechanic, and his book Cockpit and Spanner is an invaluable record of the history of aviation. We've drawn heavily on his work for our displays about the aerodrome. Stan Gervais had a varied career in broadcasting, both here and over on the East Coast. We know him here best as a prolific self-publishing author of numerous books focusing on local history, including an interesting one called 5 Graves at Dalwallinu, where he recalls a story of, is it Lever and another family and the ancestry of the children, and it's an interesting and quite evocative book, and there's some wonderful pictures of the 5 graves that exist in Dalwallinu. Bob Corby developed his writing skills as a correspondent at local newspapers, and then he became an author of numerous books on Perth, and as part of our artistic heritage, we can claim him because he's written books about Perth, about Maylands. Bill Day was a writer and activist based in Maylands, but also works on behalf of Indigenous people. We did a lot of work up in the Northern Territory, but has strong connections with Maylands in his time. And our very own Mary-Louise McDermott, who's written a number of books, and John McLennan, who's not only our researcher, but is also an author. And his books, again, these are available in a library at the old police station. So look, there's just 6 of the names of people that we see associated as writers with Maylands. And street art. Here's your picture quiz. Do you know where this is? Just down by there, just across the road, isn't it? This is the old the old post office. This is the bottom of 7th. What do they describe it as? A champion or encapsulating the history of the railway or the bridge, I believe, the old bridge. This one. This is down by Chase Farm, down on the peninsula, Aboriginal artwork, and I've completely forgotten where this one is.
Central Avenue.
Central Avenue, think, Angela? Central Avenue, whereabouts?
That's in Central Avenue. The top of Central Avenue.
Oh, right, okay, thank you.
Just down there.
Right.
We go down the hill to where they the yacht trolley.
Ah, right down, okay, yeah, thank you. So yeah, so that's some. And now street art, this is always a difficult one to do because it's constantly changing. Here's some of the giraffes on 8th Avenue. This is on the corner of 9th and Mrs. S. This is currently work in progress. We have a street walk, street art walk. Sue's currently going around checking that these are still there, that they haven't been painted over. And of course, every time you go around, there's new art. Things have sprung up. One of the most dramatic ones is at the top of 8th Avenue by the railway station that was created during the street festival last year. And so that will form part of our displays and part of our guided walks. Anyone who thinks they've spotted a new piece of art that we should know about, please let us know. There's so many more. This talk could have been even longer. People I've heard about, but I haven't been able to include because I haven't done the research yet. Other music venues, arts organisations, Roxy Lane Theatre, other things like that. Performers, artists, people who are based here. People I don't even know about. This could have been longer. But please, if you know of anything you think that we should include people as part of our artistic heritage, I'd love to hear. But I do have to stop. I said it would be about 40 to 45 minutes. I've just gone over. But let me just end up with some conclusions. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about some of the many different aspects of life here in Maylands. Alongside the heritage buildings, the wonderful scenery along the peninsula, we've got this wonderful heritage that we've had through people with artistic creations. And I really believe in the value of preserving not only our history, but our heritage. And there's also added value in being able to share it, not just to have it, but to be able to share it And that's one of the challenges for us at Maylands Historical, is how do we display these artistic things in a way that's engaging for people. People that may have a limited time span of attention, younger people who may not want to go in and visit an old police station. We want to engage with them on things like the street art. So it's a challenge for us all, really, is how do we make the heritage of Maylands relevant to different communities, different ages, and accessible to all. Well, that's the task that I've set myself, to think about some of that in the years to come. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Do you have...